August 1945. The air in Nagasaki smelled of ash and iron. The sky was not blue but gray, a color that seemed burned into the horizon itself. I walked barefoot across streets littered with shards of glass and roof tiles, my clothes little more than rags. The silence after the bomb was worse than the explosion itself. No birds, no dogs, only the groans of the wounded carried faintly through the ruins. I was 23 years old, the daughter of a fisherman who had died at sea years before. Until that summer, my life had been small, ordinary, filled with the rhythms of washing rice, tending a garden, bowing before shrines. War had already stolen much. My brother conscripted, our food rationed, our neighborhood blacked out at night. But nothing had prepared me for the day when light itself became a weapon, and the city I knew vanished in a single flash. I survived because I was outside the city center, carrying a basket of sweet potatoes back from the fields. When the sky split open, I fell to the ground, my ears bursting with pain. By the time I rose, the skyline had dissolved into fire. For days afterward, I stumbled through streets that no longer had names, past shadows burned into walls, past bodies too twisted to recognize. I thought death would claim me, not from the bomb, but from thirst, from hunger, from despair. Every morning I searched for food among the ruins. The government ration cards were useless now. There was nothing to distribute. We boiled weeds, gnawed on bark, chewed clay just to quiet the ache in our stomachs. Mothers tried to nurse infants whose cries had no strength left. Old men sat in silence, staring at the smoke as if waiting for ancestors to guide them away. I wrote in the corner of a charred notebook I had salvaged, "The Emperor said we must endure the unendurable, but what is left to endure when even the rice fields are ash?" Then came the rumors. American soldiers had entered the city. Some whispered they would shoot us on sight. Others claimed they would give us food, medicines, even kindness. I did not know what to believe. For years we had been told the Americans were demons, beasts who would defile our women and slaughter our children. Fear curled inside me like a second stomach, as sharp as hunger. One afternoon I saw them, a column of men in olive uniforms, their helmets glinting, rifles slung over their shoulders. They marched not with the shouts of our soldiers, but with a steady rhythm, calm, unhurried, like men who already knew the war was over. My knees buckled. I wanted to run, but where could I go? The city itself offered no hiding place, only rubble and ghosts. One of them spotted me. He raised his hand, not in violence, but in greeting. I froze, clutching the basket I still carried though it was empty. He reached into a pouch and pulled out a small rectangular package. With a faint smile, he placed it on the ground and stepped back. I stared. The package was wrapped in waxed paper, marked with English words I could not read. The smell drifted toward me. Salty, savory, unlike anything I had known. My stomach clenched with longing. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped forward and picked it up. Inside were biscuits, hard and dry, but to me they were a miracle. I bit one, and tears filled my eyes before I could swallow. In that moment, everything I had been told about Americans collapsed. They were not demons, they were men, and they were feeding me. I wanted to thank him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead I bowed, trembling, crumbs still clinging to my lips. He nodded once, then rejoined his column. The biscuits remained in my hands, warm from the sun, heavier than gold. That night, as I shared them with 2 children who had lost their parents, I wrote in my notebook again, "The enemy gave me bread. Perhaps tomorrow he will give me back my life." But part of me still wondered, what price would come with that bread? The following days blurred together, hunger pulling at me even as the memory of those biscuits lingered like a dream. I searched the ruins with others, our bare feet cut on glass and stone. Some carried buckets to fetch water from wells that smelled of smoke. Others dug with their hands through collapsed houses, hoping to find hidden jars of rice. But more often we found nothing, only bones, charred wood, the ghost of what life had been. And then, one morning, the soldiers returned. They did not come with bayonets raised, but with trucks, the engines coughing as they rolled into the shattered streets. From the back, they unloaded boxes stamped with foreign letters. I watched from a distance at first, my body trembling as much from fear as from weakness. Could this be a trap? Would they mock us, force us to beg? But then I saw it clearly. Cans of food, tins of meat, sacks of grain, and water in metal containers. The soldiers passed them to the people cautiously, as though wary of frightening us. Some civilians rushed forward, others hung back. A woman near me sobbed aloud when she was handed a can of milk for her infant. An old man clasped his hands together, muttering prayers of gratitude that sounded like the wind. I edged closer, clutching my notebook as if it might protect me. One soldier knelt and extended a small tin toward me. His face was young, too young to belong to someone in a uniform. I accepted it with trembling fingers. The label meant nothing to me, but when I pried it open, the smell of meat filled the air. Rich, salty, heavy. It struck me harder than any memory. My stomach clenched with both desire and fear. I had not eaten real food in weeks. I pressed my hands together, bowing low. He said something I did not understand, then smiled faintly before moving on. I shared the tin with the children again, breaking the meat into small pieces so each bite would last. Their eyes shone as if the taste itself was a miracle. In my notebook I wrote, "The Americans give what our own leaders could not. Perhaps kindness is stronger than any weapon." But I could not shake the unease. Was this kindness or conquest in another form? We had been taught for years that surrender was worse than death, that the emperor himself was divine, that America sought to erase Japan. Yet here I sat, chewing American food, alive because of them. My mind spun in circles. Some of the soldiers tried to speak to us, pointing at their rations, demonstrating how to open them. Their voices were strange music, filled with sounds my ears could not arrange into meaning, but their gestures were clear. They wanted us to eat. They wanted us to live. One afternoon, I followed a line of civilians toward a makeshift station where Americans were distributing supplies. The line stretched along the ruins of a street where once shops had stood. Now only walls remained, pitted with holes, roofs collapsed. The sun beat down, and the smell of decay clung to every breath. When it was my turn, a soldier handed me a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was bread, soft, white, unlike the coarse barley loaves we once knew. I pressed it to my face, inhaling deeply. The warmth of it shocked me, as if life itself had been returned in that loaf. Tears blurred my vision, and the soldier, noticing, simply nodded with solemn eyes. That night I could not sleep. I stared at the bread, torn between devouring it and saving it. In the end, I ate half, slowly, savoring each bite until my jaw ached. The other half I hid under a broken tile, afraid someone might steal it. Hunger is stronger than friendship in ruins. But when morning came, I shared the rest with an old neighbor who could barely walk. She clutched my hands, whispering thanks until her voice broke. The city itself seemed to shift after that. Where silence had ruled, now there were murmurs, even laughter. Children followed the soldiers, hoping for candy or biscuits. Women clutched tins of milk to their breasts as if guarding treasure. Old men spoke in hushed tones about the war being truly over. We had lived so long under fear that kindness felt like a foreign occupation of its own. Yet at night, I still wondered, what did these men see when they looked at me? Did they know I was Japanese, the enemy their country had fought? Did they see guilt in my face, or only hunger? One of them caught my gaze once and held it for a long second. His eyes were tired, not angry. I thought of my brother, conscripted and sent to the front, perhaps already dead. Maybe somewhere in America, this soldier's sister wondered if he would return. Maybe we were both only siblings caught in a war we did not choose. In my notebook, I wrote again, "The war told us we were enemies. Hunger tells me we are the same." The days after the surrender stretched into weeks. Our city was broken, but life began to move in small, stubborn steps. Wells were cleaned, schools turned into shelters, markets reopened among the rubble. And always the Americans came with their trucks, their boxes, their strange accents. I no longer feared them, but I still could not quite believe them. Every time I tasted their rations, I asked myself the same question: why would the enemy feed me? And each time I swallowed, I wondered if perhaps the answer was not in politics or victory, but in something simpler: human beings refusing to let other human beings starve. But could kindness survive where bombs had fallen? By late September, the rains came, soaking the ruins until the streets turned into rivers of mud. The smell of smoke faded, replaced by damp earth and rot. Yet even in the rain, the Americans returned with their trucks, the olive green paint streaked with water, their boots sinking into the muck as they handed out boxes. Children ran barefoot through puddles to meet them, shouting words they did not understand, but grinning with mouths full of biscuits. I stood in line again, clutching my shawl against the rain. The soldier who gave me rations this time was older, his face lined and weary. He handed me a tin and, seeing my shivering, pulled something else from his pack, a wool blanket, rough but warm. I froze. No one had given me such a thing since before the war. My own government had stripped blankets for soldiers, left us with scraps, and yet here was the enemy, draping one across my shoulders. The weight of it broke something inside me. I bowed so deeply my forehead touched the mud. He touched his helmet in reply, then moved on. That night, I sat beneath the blanket, listening to the rain pound on the roofless skeleton of my house. For the first time since the bomb, I felt something close to comfort. My notebook lay open on my lap, the words smeared by damp fingers. Why is it that the enemy gives me warmth when my own country gave me only commands to endure? As weeks turned into months, the shock began to fade, but the strangeness did not. American soldiers became part of the city's landscape. They patrolled with rifles but also laughed with children, tossed them candy, showed them pictures from home. I had never seen such photographs before. Smiling families, cars gleaming in driveways, girls in dresses that looked like scenes from another planet. For years our propaganda had shown Americans as grotesque monsters, but here they were, men with sweethearts and mothers and children waiting for them. I wondered how many Japanese mothers had been told the same lies about us. Sometimes I dreamed of my brother. Had he been told that American soldiers were demons? Had he fought them to the death, believing every word? Was he even alive to learn the truth? I woke from those dreams shaking, my stomach hollow even after eating. One afternoon, I walked toward the makeshift hospital, carrying a bundle of weeds for the soup pot. Outside, I saw an American medic kneeling beside an old man whose leg had been mangled. The medic's hands were steady as he wrapped bandages, his voice calm. The old man winced but did not resist. I watched in silence, struck by the irony. Only weeks earlier, Japanese officers had barked orders that mercy was weakness, that surrender was shame. Yet here was mercy, saving one of us, even after we had been their enemies. I wanted to speak, to ask the medic why, but my tongue locked. Instead, I bowed, and he gave a brief nod before returning to his work. I carried the weeds inside, my heart pounding as if I had touched something forbidden. Not everyone welcomed them. Some civilians turned away, refusing their rations, muttering about pride, about the emperor. They clung to anger as if it were the last possession left to them. But hunger is stronger than pride, and slowly even the most stubborn accepted the food. We were all alive because of those boxes. That truth could not be denied. And yet, the questions haunted me. What did this kindness mean? Was it simply policy, a way to prevent riots? Or did these men truly feel compassion for those who had once been called their enemies? When I saw them laugh with children, when I tasted chocolate for the first time in my life, when I wrapped myself in the rough wool blanket, I began to believe it was real. Still, guilt clung to me. Could I accept kindness from the very men whose planes had dropped the bomb that destroyed my city? Each bite of bread was tangled with sorrow. Each swallow of coffee carried ashes with it. My gratitude fought with grief until both exhausted me. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the broken skyline, I walked to the harbor where American ships loomed against the horizon. Refugees clustered nearby, waiting for supplies. I sat on a broken stone wall, chewing a biscuit. A boy beside me asked in a whisper if I thought the Americans would stay forever. I did not know how to answer. In my notebook I wrote, "I cannot hate them. I cannot love them. They are the ones who ended our world and the ones who feed us in the ruins." How does one live with that contradiction? That night, under the blanket, I listened to the crickets return to the fields for the first time since the bomb. The sound was soft, ordinary, almost beautiful. Life, stubborn and small, was creeping back, but peace had its own weight. For years we had been told exactly what to do, when to bow, when to cheer, when to sacrifice. Now there was only uncertainty. Would the Americans rebuild our city? Would they leave us to our hunger? Would they punish us for the war? No one knew. And still, the memory of that first biscuit haunted me. the taste of salt, the shock of kindness, the moment when everything I had believed about enemies and demons shattered like glass. As autumn turned to winter, I began to wonder if survival itself was the real victory. And yet, deep inside, I still feared the day when the rations would stop. By winter, the ruins had grown colder, the air cut like knives, and the rubble that once smelled of smoke and ash now reeked of mold and dampness. I wrapped myself tighter in the rough wool blanket the Americans had given me, but even then I shivered at night. The frost painted white edges on the broken walls, and water froze in the shells of what had once been homes. Yet every morning, almost like clockwork, the trucks came. Their engines growled through the streets, and with them came boxes, cans of Spam, powdered milk, hard biscuits, coffee, even rice. The olive paint on the trucks glistened with frost, and soldiers jumped down with practiced ease, their breath steaming in the air. I would watch them unload crates marked with foreign letters. They stacked them carefully, their movements precise, their voices carrying over the ruins in tones I still did not understand but had grown used to hearing. Children would run toward them, their bare feet slapping on frozen stones. The soldiers laughed, tossing them candy wrapped in bright foil, small treasures that shone even in the gray of war. The laughter of those children seemed like an act of defiance, a rebellion against the silence that had dominated Nagasaki since the bomb. The first time I tasted their cocoa, I thought I would collapse. The powder dissolved into steaming water, releasing a rich smell that made my stomach twist in longing. I cupped the tin mug with both hands, letting the warmth soak into my frozen skin. The taste was both sweet and bitter, alien, and yet so comforting it hurt. For a moment, I forgot the shadows burned into walls, the graves hastily dug, the faces I would never see again. For a moment, I was only a woman drinking something warm after months of hunger. I closed my eyes and felt tears slide down my face, disappearing into the steam. Around me, children licked their mugs clean, their lips stained brown, their giggles echoing like the sound of bells in a temple that no longer stood. But always, after the sweetness, came the bitterness of memory. Each bite of bread reminded me of those who had not lived to taste it. My brother, drafted into the war and gone without a trace. My neighbors, burned alive in their homes. The mothers who tried to nurse children with no milk left in their bodies. I chewed slowly, as if eating too quickly would dishonor them, as if every mouthful carried the weight of ghosts. The Americans gave life, yes, but their country had also delivered the bomb that erased ours. That contradiction was a knot I could not untangle. One afternoon, I walked alone to the hypocenter, where the earth had been scorched into glass. The ground was still barren months later. Nothing grew there, no birds sang, no animals dared to return. Only the shadows of people remained, imprinted on walls and stairs as if the blast had carved their last breaths into stone. I pressed my hand against one of those blackened shapes, tracing the outline of a child who must have been caught mid-run. My stomach twisted. Behind me, I heard the rumble of another American truck, the laughter of soldiers unloading supplies. I turned to watch them, the same hands carrying bread that might have carried bombs, the same voices speaking kindly that might have ordered destruction. And yet, without them, I would be nothing but another shadow on the wall. That was the contradiction I lived with each day. The enemy was also the savior. The conqueror was also the feeder. Hatred and gratitude lived inside me like fire and water, never fully extinguishing the other. As the months passed, the Americans became part of the rhythm of our broken city. They patrolled the streets with rifles, yes, but they also bent down to help children tie shoelaces or lifted heavy stones to clear paths for civilians. I once saw a soldier give away his own gloves to an old man shivering in the cold. Another carried a wounded child in his arms, ignoring the mud that splattered his uniform. These were not the monsters our government had promised us. They were men, as flesh and blood as my brother, as human as my father had been. I began to write more in my notebook, though my words often felt inadequate. How can I call them demons when they give us food? How can I call them angels when their bombs turned my city to ash? They are both. They are neither. They are men. And perhaps that is the most terrifying and comforting truth of all. One evening, while waiting in line for rations, I overheard two Japanese men whispering angrily. They said accepting food from the Americans was betrayal. that true loyalty meant starving rather than bowing to the enemy. But as they spoke, their hands trembled. Their eyes darted toward the bread in others' arms. When the crates opened, they rushed forward like the rest of us. Pride, I learned, weakens quickly when faced with hunger. By early spring, signs of life returned. Plum blossoms appeared, trembling on blackened branches. Farmers brought vegetables to the edge of the city, their carts creaking. Fishermen returned to the sea. Children played in the ruins, chasing each other between shattered walls as if they had never known another kind of playground. And always, the Americans were there, baseball bats in their hands, teaching boys to swing, offering gum that stuck sweetly to our teeth, showing us photographs of homes we could barely imagine. Once, a young soldier showed me a picture of his sister. She was about my age, standing in front of a house with white walls and a garden blooming behind her. He pointed at her, and then at me, speaking words I could not understand, but whose meaning I felt in my chest, that across oceans, across bombs and battles, we were the same. That night, I dreamed of my brother. In the dream, he was alive, walking toward me, smiling. He carried no rifle, no anger, only a loaf of bread. I woke with tears soaking the blanket. When the surrender was announced months earlier, I had felt nothing but numbness. Now, in the slow rhythm of survival, I began to understand what peace meant. It was not joy, not celebration. It was a child holding a biscuit instead of crying from hunger. It was steam rising from cocoa in frozen hands. It was the sound of soldiers' laughter blending with the laughter of civilians, not as enemies, but simply as humans who wanted to live. I was a Japanese civilian, and I couldn't believe it when American soldiers shared their rations with us. That simple act, repeated again and again in the ruins, changed everything I thought I knew about enemies, about kindness, about survival. I survived the bomb, but it was bread that reminded me life could continue. It was chocolate that made me smile again. It was a wool blanket that gave me warmth when I thought the world had gone cold forever. And it was the humanity of those I had been taught to hate that showed me the war was truly over. Now, as I write these words, I know history will remember battles, generals, treaties, and weapons. But I hope it also remembers the smaller things: a tin of milk handed to a mother, a blanket given to a stranger, a biscuit placed into shaking hands. Because sometimes it is the smallest things that rebuild a broken life. If my story moved you, if you felt even a fraction of what it means to survive on the kindness of those once called the enemy, then keep this memory alive. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and share your thoughts. Your voice carries these forgotten stories forward so that they will never vanish into silence.